In the beginning, there was silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of waiting, vast, pregnant with possibility, trembling on the edge of becoming. Before the sun first burned its path across the sky, before the moon cast silver upon still waters, before even the stars were kindled in their ancient courses, there existed only the void. And in that void, something stirred. The world you know, Middle-earth, with its green hills and gray mountains, its forests dark and rivers bright, was not built by hands of stone and mortar. It was sung into being. The Aenir, the holy ones who dwelt with Eru Iluvatar before time itself had meaning, raised their voices in a great music. Each voice carried a theme given by the One, and from those themes came harmonies beyond mortal comprehension. Mountains rose from the swell of deep bass notes. Rivers flowed in cascading melodies. The very fabric of earth and sky wove itself from interlocking rhythms, each note a thread in the tapestry of creation. But even the greatest symphony must end. The music faded. The Aenir descended into the world they had sung, becoming powers within it, shaping, guiding, watching. Yet the echo of that first song never truly ceased. It lingers still in the sigh of wind through ancient oaks, in the crash of waves upon forgotten shores, in the quiet hum of starlight falling on untouched snow. Every living thing in Arda carries within it a fragment of that divine melody, a memory encoded in blood and bone. The Elves, the firstborn, awoke to a world still resonant with creation's echo. They learned to listen, to remember, to sing back. Their music became the closest thing to the original song that mortal or immortal lips could shape. Men, the second-born, came later, and their songs were different. Shorter, fiercer, burning with the intensity of lives that flickered and died like candle flames in the dark. Together, these two kindreds became the voice of Middle-earth, singing the world forward through ages of wonder and terror. But songs, like kingdoms, can be lost. Wars came dark and terrible. Cities fell into ruin, their towers crumbling into the earth. Libraries burned. The wise were slain, their knowledge dying with them. Whole peoples vanished, taking their melodies into the shadows of memory. Languages shifted and broke apart, and the songs that once rang clear became garbled whispers, then silence. The lullabies that elven mothers sang in Beleriand beneath the light of the trees are gone now, known to none. The battle hymns of Numenor's golden legions sink beneath the waves, unheard for millennia. Even the simple walking songs of forgotten villages, the working chants of craftsmen long dust, the love ballads of maidens whose names no longer exist, all lost, scattered like autumn leaves before an endless wind. Yet fragments remain. In the last homely house, in the halls of Minas Tirith, in the wandering memories of the long-lived and the long-suffering, there are still those who remember snatches of the old songs. A verse here, a refrain there, like shards of broken glass reflecting a light that no longer shines. These remnants tell us stories that history books cannot. They reveal the soul of ages past, the dreams and terrors that shaped the peoples of Middle-earth. They are windows into a world that was, and perhaps, in some distant echo, still is. This is not merely a tale of music. It is a tale of memory and loss, of beauty and sorrow intertwined. It is the story of how cultures spoke their truth through song, how they faced darkness with melody, and how even in defeat, they left behind notes that refused to be silenced. It is about the power of a single voice raised against the void, and the tragedy of voices that called out once, then were heard no more. Somewhere in the deep places of the earth, In caverns where no mortal foot has trodden for 10,000 years, a song is still singing. A single note, pure and clear and impossibly ancient, rings out through the darkness. It carries with it the weight of creation, the sorrow of ages, and a question that has never been answered. Listen. Can you hear it? The last homely house stands in a hidden valley, sheltered by mountains and magic. Rivendell, the elves call it Imladris in the High Tongue. Its halls have seen the passing of 3 ages. Kings have sought counsel there. Warriors have rested before doomed quests. The weary have found solace in its gardens, where ancient trees whisper secrets to those who know how to listen. But Rivendell's greatest treasure is not its beauty, nor even the wisdom of Lord Elrond Half-Elven who dwells there. It is memory. The house preserves what the world has forgotten. In chambers deep and high, in libraries lit by ever-burning lamps, scrolls are kept bound in silver leaf, their parchment yellowed by ages beyond counting. Here are recorded the genealogies of lost kingdoms, the treaties of broken alliances, the maps of cities now mere dust. And here, too, are the songs. Elrond is a master of lore, one of the few remaining who bridge the vast gulf between the elder days and the present. He remembers things that even other elves have forgotten. He walked in Beleriand before it sank. He stood at the shoulder of Gil-galad when the last alliance marched to the Black Gate. He has spoken with those who saw the trees of Valinor and heard tales from lips that shaped words before any alphabet was carved in stone. In his keeping are fragments of songs that predate writing itself, passed down through chains of memory so long and fragile that it seems miraculous they survived at all. The lore masters of Rivendell are scholars, yes, but they are also minstrels. They understand what many have forgotten, that in the elder days, history was not written, it was sung. Before ink and parchment, before even the graceful script of the elves took form, knowledge was preserved in verse and melody. Songs were crafted with care, their rhythms designed to lodge in memory, their rhymes and refrains acting as anchors against the tide of forgetting. A skilled bard could recite the deeds of ancient kings, the genealogies of heroes, the creation of the world itself, all in perfectly metered lines that flowed like rivers, carrying the past forward into the future. This was the way of both elves and men. The elves, blessed with immortal memory, could recall every note perfectly across millennia. A song learned in childhood remained fresh in their minds 3,000 years later, unchanged, pristine. But even they needed the structure of verse to organize the vast ocean of their experience. For men, the need was even greater. Their lives were brief and memory faded with age. A grandfather might struggle to recall his own grandfather's face. But a song, once learned, stayed. It passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, changing slowly over generations but preserving its core truth. Elrond knows this. He has collected songs as others collect jewels. In his halls, minstrels sing lays that are older than empires. Some are in languages no longer spoken, their meanings translated but their original music preserved. Some are fragments, truncated by violence or the simple erosion of time, ending mid-verse as if the singer died before finishing. Others are complete, masterworks of ancient poets whose names are lost but whose words endure. There is a song of the awakening of the elves, preserved in archaic Quenya so old that even Elrond must pause to parse its meaning. There is a marching chant of the Edain, sung as they crossed the Blue Mountains into Beleriand, seeking alliance with the elves against Morgoth. There is a lullaby from Númenor, hauntingly sweet, that speaks of sailing west into sunset and never returning. There is a battle hymn of the Rohirrim, fierce and rhythmic, designed to be shouted from horseback as hooves thunder over plains. Each song is a world unto itself. Each carries within it the essence of a people, a moment, a truth that would otherwise be lost. To hear them is to touch the past directly, to feel the emotions of those long dead, to understand their hopes and fears in a way that no dry chronicle can convey. But the archives are not complete. They cannot be. For every song preserved, 10 have been lost. For every melody that rings out in Rivendell's Hall of Fire, 100 lie silent, forgotten, erased. The scrolls themselves hint at this absence. There are references to songs that no longer exist, titles listed in ancient catalogs, but with no accompanying text. There are incomplete verses that clearly belonged to larger works, now vanished. There are cryptic notations in Elrond's own hand, last sung in the halls of Nargothrond before its fall. No complete version survives. In a sealed chamber, accessible only to Elrond himself and a few trusted loremasters, there rests a scroll bound not in silver but in mithril thread. Its edges are scorched, as if rescued from fire. The parchment is so old that it must be handled with utmost care, for it threatens to crumble at a touch. Upon it is written a song in a script that predates even the elven kingdoms of Beleriand, a script used by the first elves who learned writing from the Valar themselves. No one knows who wrote it. No one knows who first sang it. The language is ancient beyond measure, a form of Quenya so archaic that entire passages remain untranslated. What little has been deciphered speaks of starlight and awakening, of joy mixed with an inexplicable sorrow, of voices calling out in the dark before the moon was made. Elrond has never sung it aloud. He fears that to do so might break the spell of its preservation, that the very act of speaking it might cause the last threads of its existence to fray and snap. So it remains there, sealed away, a mystery wrapped in melody. A song so old no one knows who first sang it, waiting. Before history, before the counting of years, there was starlight. The elves did not wake to sunlight. The sun had not yet been made. They opened their eyes beside the still waters of Cuivanen, the water of awakening, and above them stretched a sky blazing with stars. Those stars were new then, freshly kindled by Varda, the queen of the heavens, who set them in their courses as a gift for the children of Ilúvatar yet to come. The elves saw them and knew awe. They had no words yet, no language, only raw wonder and the beginning of thought. But thought became sound, and sound became song. The first elven song was not planned. It was not composed or rehearsed. It was a spontaneous cry of joy, a wordless melody that rose from the hearts of those first waking souls. They sang to the stars because the stars sang to them first, their light a music of its own, silent and perfect. The elves, feeling that light enter their eyes and illuminate their newly conscious minds, could do nothing but answer. Imagine that moment. Darkness all around, but not a hostile darkness. A gentle, velvety black that holds you like a mother's embrace. And scattered across that darkness, points of brilliance, each one a note in a vast cosmic choir. The elves stood, newly born yet somehow ancient, and lifted their voices. Some sang high, clear notes that echoed like bells. Others sang low, resonant tones that thrummed in the chest. Together, their voices wove a harmony that had never existed before, a mortal or immortal addition to the music of the Aenir. But the harmony was tinged with something the elves did not yet understand: longing. They looked at the stars and felt a pull toward them, a desire to reach upward, to ascend, to touch that distant light. This longing would define them for all the ages to come. Unlike men, who would find their meaning in the earth itself, the elves were always reaching skyward, their souls oriented toward a beauty they could see but not grasp. Their first songs, therefore, were not only hymns of praise, but laments for a separation they could not name. They sang of light in darkness. They sang of waking into a world that felt both strange and familiar, as if they had been dreaming it before they opened their eyes. They sang of the water beside them, its surface reflecting the stars, doubling the light, creating an infinity of brilliance above and below. And they sang of each other, discovering kinship, discovering that they were not alone. Time passed, how much they did not know. Days and nights had no meaning without sun or moon. There was only the starlight, constant and eternal, and the slow turning of constellations overhead. The elves began to explore, to wander the shores of Cuivianen, to venture into the forests beyond. And as they wandered, they sang. Song became their way of marking the world, of naming what they found. A tree was not just a tree. It was a tall-standing, root-deep, leaf-crowned thing, and they sang its existence into language. A bird was a wing-swift, sky dancer, voice of dawn, and they sang to it until it sang back. But not all was joy. There were disappearances. Elves would wander from the group and not return. In the morning, if morning it could be called, their absence would be noticed. Search parties went out, calling names that were still new and unfamiliar on their tongues. Sometimes they found nothing. Sometimes they found signs of struggle, broken branches, disturbed earth. Rarely they found bodies, twisted and ruined in ways that spoke of malice. Fear entered the songs then. The melodies that had been pure and bright took on darker tones. The elves sang warnings to one another, cautioning against straying too far, against wandering alone. They sang of shadows that moved without source, of eyes that watched from the darkness beyond the starlight's reach. They did not know that Melkor, the great enemy, had sent his servants to capture them, to drag them into his dungeons and twist them into mockeries of their original forms. They did not know that their kindred were being tortured and corrupted, transformed over centuries into creatures of hate and malice. But they felt the wrongness, and it seeped into their music. Thus were born the first laments, not laments for the dead, for the elves did not yet truly understand death, but laments for the lost. Songs that called out into the darkness, hoping for an answer that never came. Songs that wept without tears, for the elves had not yet learned to weep. These laments were eerie, unsettling, filled with dissonance and unresolved phrases. They circled back on themselves, searching, never finding rest. One such lament was later recorded in fragmentary form, preserved by the lore masters of Tirion in Valinor, and eventually copied into the archives of Rivendell. It is called Ni Atarma in Quenya, which means, Alas, Father, though the title may be a later addition. The song is sung in a minor key, its melody descending rather than ascending, pulling the listener down into sorrow. It speaks of a father searching for his daughter, calling her name across empty hills, receiving only the echo of his own voice in reply. The final verse is incomplete, ending abruptly as if the singer could not bear to finish. The elves sang it only rarely and always with reluctance. It brought back memories too painful, too close to the surface of their immortal consciousness. To sing it was to remember, and to remember was to grieve anew. Yet even in fear and sorrow, the elves did not stop singing. Song was woven into their very nature. It was how they understood the world, how they expressed what words alone could not contain. Their music was not mere entertainment or decoration. It was a fundamental act of being. To be elven was to sing, as surely as to breathe, and the stars listened. Varda, who had made them, heard the songs rising from Cuivanen and was moved. She did not descend to comfort the elves, for that was not yet the will of Iluvatar. But she ensured that the stars shone brighter, that their light reached further into the dark places, offering what protection they could. The elves felt this and sang their gratitude, their voices climbing back toward the light, refusing to be dragged entirely into despair. Years passed. Generations were born under starlight, each learning the songs of their parents, adding their own verses, creating a living tradition. The music of the elves grew richer, more complex, layered with history and meaning. They developed different styles, different modes, different purposes for their songs. There were hymns for waking, songs for walking, chants for gathering food, melodies for courtship, lullabies for the rare elven children who were born. Each song fit into a great tapestry, a musical culture that was both deeply personal and profoundly communal. But always, beneath even the happiest songs, there ran that thread of longing. The elves looked at the stars and yearned. They did not know for what, not yet. They only knew that something called to them from beyond the horizon, a destiny waiting, a purpose unfulfilled. Then, one night, strangers came. They rode on horses that shone like silver in the starlight. They were tall and bright, and their presence filled the elves with both awe and fear. These were emissaries from the Valor, sent to invite the elves westward to leave Cuivanen and journey to the blessed realm beyond the sea. A great debate arose. Should they go? Should they stay? What lay beyond the known world? The elves sang their questions to the stars, hoping for answers. But the stars, as always, remained silent, beautiful, and distant. And in the shadows, something watched. Something that had been stealing elves in the dark, twisting them, breaking them. It watched the emissaries and knew that its time was ending. It let out a cry, a sound so filled with hate and anguish that it cut through the night like a blade. The elves heard it. They stopped singing. The melody that had risen for ages, unbroken, faltered. And in that silence, the first true darkness fell. The decision to leave Cuivanen was not unanimous. It could not be. The elves were free beings, gifted with will and choice, and their choices diverged. Some heard the call of the Valor and felt an overwhelming pull westward, toward the promise of safety, beauty, and communion with powers greater than themselves. Others looked at the familiar shores, the forests they had explored, the stars they had sung to all their lives, and could not bear to leave. To depart felt like betrayal, like abandoning the very place that had given them birth. Thus began the sundering, the first great division of the elven kindred. Those who chose to follow the Valor's emissaries became known as the Eldar, the people of the stars, though later they would be called the High Elves. Those who remained became the Avari, the unwilling, and they fade from the central tales, their songs lost to history or transformed into strange, half-remembered melodies sung by wood elves in distant forests. The march westward was not swift. It took years, decades, perhaps even centuries, for the elves measured time differently then, without sun or moon to mark its passage. They traveled in 3 great hosts, divided by kinship and temperament. The Vanyar went first, led by Ingwe, their hearts set wholly on reaching the light of Valinor. Behind them came the Noldor, led by Finwë, their minds keen and curious, eager to learn from the Valor. Last came the Teleri, led by Elwë and Alwë, who traveled most slowly, for they loved the starlit forests of Middle-earth and lingered often, reluctant to leave each beautiful place behind. Each host developed its own musical tradition during the march. The Vanyar sang hymns of aspiration, their melodies soaring upward, always climbing toward higher notes, as if trying to reach the realm of the valor through song alone. Their music was pure, almost abstract, concerned less with the world around them than with transcendent beauty. Later, in Valinor, they would become the most beloved of the valor, dwelling on the slopes of Tanaquetil, the highest mountain, singing praises that echoed through the halls of Manwë himself. The Noldor sang differently. Their songs were intricate, complex, filled with layered harmonies and counterpoint. They loved structure, pattern, the architecture of sound. As they marched, they began to sing not only of what they saw, but of what they imagined, of things that did not yet exist but could be made. Their music carried the seeds of craftsmanship, of creation. They would become the great smiths and artisans of the Elves, and their songs would be sung in workshops where mithril was forged and jewels cut, each note a prayer for precision, each melody a guide for skillful hands. The Teleri sang of water. From the beginning, they were drawn to rivers and lakes, to the sound of moving water, to the play of starlight on rippling surfaces. Their music was fluid, flowing, full of runs and cascades that mimicked the movement of streams. They had a gift for capturing the essence of natural sounds, the babble of brooks, the crash of waterfalls, the gentle lap of waves on a shore. When at last they reached the sea, they fell so deeply in love with it that many refused to leave, remaining on the western shores of Middle-earth, singing to the waves. Those who eventually did cross became the greatest mariners among the Elves, and their city, Ulqualanda, was built where the sea met the land, its harbor filled with swan-shaped ships that sang when the wind filled their sails. The journey was long, and it changed them. They were no longer the innocent, newly awakened beings who had stood by Cuivanen. They had walked across mountains and through dark forests. They had seen the ruins left by Melkor's wars against the Valor, the broken lands, the scarred earth. They had lost companions to accident, to sickness of the spirit, to the lingering darkness that still prowled the eastern lands. Their songs reflected this experience, becoming deeper, more layered with meaning. They sang of endurance. Long chants that measured the rhythm of walking, that kept feet moving when exhaustion threatened. These songs were simple, repetitive, almost hypnotic, designed to numb the mind to weariness and pain. Hour after hour, day after day, the Elves sang the same verses, the same refrains, until the words lost individual meaning and became pure rhythm, pure will. They sang of hope. Ballads that spoke of the light waiting in the west, of the promise of the valor, of a land where no shadow fell and no sorrow dwelt. These songs were brighter, full of major keys and rising melodies. They painted pictures in sound, white towers gleaming in golden light, gardens where flowers never faded, halls where the valor themselves walked among the elves, sharing wisdom and friendship. Whether these images were based on truth or merely hope, none of the marching elves yet knew, but the songs sustained them. They sang of loss, laments for the land left behind, for Cuivanen fading into the distance, for kinfolk who chose to remain and would likely never be seen again. These songs were quieter, more personal, often sung by individuals rather than groups. They spoke of memory, of the ache of separation, of looking back over one's shoulder and seeing only empty horizon. The elves were learning a lesson that would define them forever. Immortality did not mean freedom from pain. They would remember everything, everyone, every parting, every loss, carrying it forward through the long ages with perfect clarity. Their sorrows would not fade with time but accumulate, each one adding weight to the burden of existence. The march created heroes and legends. Tales were told of elves who performed great deeds along the way, slaying monsters that threatened the host, finding paths through impossible terrain, saving comrades from disaster. And these tales were, of course, set to music. Epic lays developed, long narrative songs that could take hours to perform in full, chronicling the adventures of individual heroes or entire kindreds. These lays became treasured possessions, passed down through families, added to by each generation. One such lay told of Lenwe, a lord of the Teleri who led his people away from the main host, refusing to cross the misty mountains. He and his followers turned south, wandering into the great forests of the Vales of Anduin, and became the ancestors of the Wood Elves. The song of Lenwe's departure is melancholy, filled with a sense of diverging paths and choices that cannot be undone. It ends not with resolution, but with a question. Did Lenwe find the peace he sought, or did he lead his people into isolation and slow fading? No one knows, for the Wood Elves kept their own counsel, and their songs diverged from those of the High Elves. At last, after a journey that spanned ages, the hosts of the Eldar reached Beleriand, the western lands where the sea could be glimpsed beyond the coastal mountains. Here, the Valor sent a great island to ferry the elves across the ocean to Valinor. The Vanyar and Noldor embarked and were carried west, leaving Middle-earth behind. But the Teleri, as always, lingered. They had fallen in love with the coasts of Beleriand, and many chose to remain, at least for a time. It was on these shores that the Teleri perfected their music of the sea. They sang to the waves, and the waves seemed to answer, their rhythms syncing with elven melodies. They learned the songs of gulls and the cries of sea beasts. They built boats and sang as they sailed, discovering that song could summon favorable winds, calm storms, guide them through fog. Their magic was subtle, woven into melody, inseparable from the music itself. When at last the Teleri were ferried to Valinor, they brought these songs with them. In Ulqualinde, their haven in the Blessed Realm, they sang every dawn and every dusk, their voices rising from the white towers and spreading across the bay. It was said that the swans of Ulqualinde, the great birds who nested there and accompanied the elven ships, learned the Teleri's songs and sang them back in their own avian voices, creating a haunting harmony that was neither fully elvish nor fully animal but something in between, something wild and beautiful and tinged with the mystery of the sea. But even in Valinor, the Teleri's songs carried an undercurrent of longing. They had crossed the sea, yes, but they remembered Middle-earth. They remembered the forests and rivers, the stars reflected in still water, the feeling of wind off unknown lands. Part of them remained always on those distant shores, and their music reflected it. The Noldor, meanwhile, sang different songs in Valinor. They walked the streets of Tirion, the city they built on the hill of Tuna, and their songs echoed off white walls and crystal towers. They sang as they worked in forges, crafting wonders never seen before. They sang as they studied under the Valor, learning the secrets of the world. And slowly, subtly, a new theme entered their music: pride. The Noldor were mighty, skilled, brilliant. They surpassed their teachers in many crafts. They created things of such beauty that even the Valor marveled. And as their power grew, their songs shifted. The humility of the early days faded. The gratitude toward the Valor became tempered with a sense of equality, even superiority. They sang of their own deeds, their own greatness, their own destiny. And in the heart of one Noldo, the mightiest of them all, a dark melody began to take shape. Feanor, son of Finwë, gifted beyond measure, proud beyond wisdom, started to sing a song that no one else could hear. It was a song of possession, of fire, of oaths that could not be broken. It was a song that would bring ruin. Across the sea in Beleriand, a shadow stirred. Melkor, who had been imprisoned by the Valor, was released on a plea for mercy. He walked among the elves, speaking fair words, sowing discord, and in secret he plotted. The music of Middle-earth trembled as if sensing what was to come. Harmonies clashed. Notes fell out of tune. Somewhere a great harp string snapped, its sound ringing out like a warning. But no one heeded it. The song of betrayal was beginning. There are songs that should never have been sung. Melodies so twisted by hate and pride that they corrupt the very air through which they pass. Words so laden with doom that to speak them is to invite catastrophe. The Oath of Feanor was such a song. It was not a hymn or a lament or a ballad. It was a curse disguised as a vow, a promise that bound its speakers to darkness as surely as chains of iron. Feanor crafted the Silmarils, 3 jewels that captured the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, the light that existed before the sun and moon, the light that was itself a pale echo of the original creation. These gems were the greatest work ever made by mortal or immortal hands. They blazed with an inner fire, pure and holy, and to look upon them was to glimpse something beyond the world, something transcendent. But beauty can become obsession. Love can become possessiveness. Feanor, who had poured his very soul into the making of the Silmarils, could not bear the thought of another touching them, owning them, even looking upon them. He held them close, guarded them jealously, and his heart grew dark with the fear of loss. Then Melkor, now called Morgoth by the Elves, struck. He slew Finwë, Feanor's father. He shattered the 2 trees, plunging Valinor into darkness. And he stole the Silmarils, fleeing across the sea to Middle-earth, to his fortress of Angband in the north, where he set the jewels in his iron crown and mocked the Valor from afar. Feanor's grief and rage were beyond measure. He stood before his people, the Noldor, and spoke words that burned like fire. He spoke of vengeance, of pursuit, of reclaiming what was stolen no matter the cost. And then he swore an oath. His 7 sons stood beside him and swore the same oath, their voices joining his in a terrible harmony. They called upon the name of Iluvatar himself, the one who created all, and vowed that they would not rest until the Silmarils were returned to them. They vowed to pursue any who held the jewels, whether Vala, elf, man, or demon. They vowed to slay any who stood in their way, friend or foe, kinsman or stranger. They vowed never to turn back, never to relent, never to forgive. It was a song of binding. Each word was a link in a chain, each phrase a lock clicking shut. The oath was not merely a promise, it was a magical compulsion, a fate written in fire. Once spoken, it could not be unspoken. Once sworn, it could not be forsworn. The sons of Feanor were trapped by their own words, doomed to pursue the Silmarils unto death and beyond. The Noldor, stirred by Feanor's rhetoric and inflamed by their own pride, followed him into exile. They left Valinor against the will of the Valor, marching east toward Middle-earth, toward war. But the journey was cursed from the start. To cross the sea, they needed ships, and the only ships capable of such a voyage belonged to the Teleri in Ulqualanda. Feanor demanded the ships. The Teleri refused. The ships were not mere vessels to them. They were works of art, almost living things, shaped with song and love over long years. They could not simply be given away. Feanor, consumed by his oath, by his need to reach Middle-earth and pursue Morgoth, would not accept refusal. The first kinslaying began at dawn. The Noldor attacked their own kindred elf fighting elf for the first time in history. Blood stained the white keys of Ulqualinde. The swan ships burned or were seized. The Teleri, though brave, were not warriors. They fell before the fury of the Noldor. Their songs of the sea turned to screams, then to silence. The Noldor took the ships and sailed, but the stain of kinslaying could not be washed away. Their music, which had been bright and proud, now carried a note of horror, of guilt. Some among them wept as they sang, knowing they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Yet Feanor did not weep. He sang his oath again, louder, as if volume could drown out doubt. His sons sang with him, their voices hard and unyielding. And the Noldor, bound now by blood and complicity, followed. The Valar, grieving and wrathful, sent a messenger to pronounce the doom of the Noldor. Mandos, the judge of the dead, spoke in a voice that echoed across the waves. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed. The Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor lies the wrath of the Valar from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well. The words fell like stones, heavy and final. Some of the Noldor turned back, unwilling to continue under such a curse. But most pressed on, and the doom settled over them like a shroud. In Middle-earth, the Noldor built kingdoms. They raised fortresses and cities, carved realms out of wilderness, and waged war against Morgoth for centuries. And throughout it all, they sang. Their songs became darker, fiercer, edged with desperation. They sang of battles won and lost, of heroes who fell in glory and companions who died in darkness. They sang of the Silmarils, always the Silmarils, the jewels that shone in Morgoth's crown, tantalizingly close yet forever out of reach. The sons of Feanor sang the oath repeatedly, as if repetition could give them strength. It became a ritual, a grim chant before battle. The words, once spoken in rage, became rote, hollow, but no less binding. The oath drove them to terrible deeds. When Beren and Luthien recovered a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown and it passed into the hands of Dior, who was Beren's grandson, the sons of Feanor demanded its return. When Dior refused, they attacked, and the second kinslaying occurred. Dior was slain, along with his wife and many of his people. Yet the Silmaril escaped, carried away by Dior's daughter Elwing. Years later, the sons of Feanor found her. The third kinslaying happened at the havens of Sirion, a refuge for those fleeing Morgoth's onslaught. Again, elf slew elf. Again, the sons of Feanor took what they sought or tried to. Elwing cast herself into the sea with the Silmaril, and the jewel was lost to them once more. The surviving sons, only two remained by then, Medros and Maglar, wandered the ruins of Beleriand, singing laments that were almost mad with grief. They had become slaves to the oath, puppets dancing on strings they themselves had tied. They hated what they had done, yet they could not stop. The oath sang in their blood, a melody of compulsion that drowned out all else. When the War of Wrath finally ended and Morgoth was cast into the void, the Silmarils were recovered. Medros and Maglar stole them from the camp of the victorious host, claiming their right by the oath. But the jewels burned them. The Silmarils, holy and pure, rejected the hands stained with innocent blood. Medros, unable to bear the pain and the horror of what he had become, cast himself into a fiery chasm, taking his Silmaril with him. Maglar threw his into the sea and wandered away, singing a lament that had no end. It is said that Magler still walks the shores of Middle-earth, an immortal ghost, singing the same song over and over. Fishermen claim to hear it on foggy nights, a voice rising from the waves, filled with such sorrow that those who hear it weep without knowing why. The song has no words, or if it does, they are in a language older than memory. It is the sound of regret given form, of a soul trapped by its own choices, unable to die, unable to find peace. The oath of Fëanor became a cautionary tale among the elves. They sang of it, yes, but carefully, respectfully, as one might speak of a plague or a curse. The melody of the oath itself was never fully recorded, for fear that to sing it might invoke its power. Only fragments exist, scattered through lore, each one dark and dissonant. Yet even in darkness, there is a terrible beauty. The songs of the Noldor during the Wars of Beleriand are some of the most powerful in all the history of Middle-earth. They are epic, tragic, filled with moments of stunning heroism and crushing defeat. They speak to the duality of the elven spirit, capable of creating transcendent beauty, yet vulnerable to pride, to obsession, to the very darkness they fought against. The greatest of these songs is the Noldolante, the Fall of the Noldor, composed by Magler himself before the final darkness took him. It is a masterwork of despair, a long lament that recounts the entire history of the Noldor's exile, from the theft of the Silmarils to the kinslayings to the wars against Morgoth. It does not flinch from truth. It does not excuse or justify. It simply tells in verse and melody what happened. And in so doing, it becomes a memorial, a way of honoring both the glory and the tragedy of a people who reached too high and fell too far. In Rivendell, the Noldolante is sung once every century, on a night when the stars are bright and the valley is still. Elrond himself leads the performance, his voice carrying the weight of ages. All who dwell in the last homely house gather to listen, and silence falls profound and heavy. For hours, the song unfolds, each verse a hammer blow, each refrain a twist of the knife. By the end, there is not a dry eye among the listeners, elf or mortal. And when the final note fades, there is a moment, just a moment, when something hangs in the air. A question unspoken but deeply felt. Could it have been otherwise? The stars give no answer. The darkness listens. And in the depths of the ocean, a jewel burns, waiting. Men awoke in the east, far from the lands where elves first opened their eyes. They awoke not to starlight but to the sun, newly risen in the sky, blazing with a light that was fierce and golden and undeniable. The elves had called the stars beautiful, mysterious, distant. Men found the sun harsh, revealing, inescapable. It showed them the world in stark clarity, every stone and tree and shadow defined, leaving no room for ambiguity. This difference in awakening shaped everything that followed. The first men had no teachers. The elves had the valor to guide them, immortal powers who could explain the nature of the world. Men had only themselves. They learned by trial, by error, by observation. They discovered fire by watching lightning strike dry grass. They learned which plants could be eaten and which brought death. They developed language slowly, piecing together words and grammar from raw need to communicate. And they sang. Human song was different from elven song from the very beginning. It was rougher, simpler, more immediate. The elves sang of eternal truths, of beauty that transcended time. Men sang of hunger, of fear, of the joy of finding water after a long day's thirst. Their songs were grounded in the physical, the temporal, the fleeting. They did not have the luxury of immortality to refine their melodies over millennia. A man might live 60 years, perhaps 70 if he was fortunate. His songs had to mean something now, in this moment, or they were wasted. This urgency gave human music a power that elven music sometimes lacked. It burned brighter because it burned shorter. A man singing of love knew that love could end with death in a handful of decades. An elf singing of love knew it would endure for ages, and so the song, while beautiful, carried less desperation. Human songs were filled with intensity, with passion, with a fierce insistence on meaning in the face of mortality. The first human songs were work songs. Chants to coordinate effort, to make labor bearable. When a group of men lifted a heavy stone to build a wall, they sang in rhythm, each heave timed to a beat. When women ground grain into flour, they sang to measure the tedious back-and-forth motion of the grinding stone. When hunters tracked prey through the forest, they sang low, almost under their breath, songs that told them how to move, when to wait, when to strike. These songs had no pretension to art. They were tools as practical as a spear or a basket. But even tools can become beautiful in skilled hands. Over time, the work songs developed complexity. Harmonies appeared. Verses were added that told stories, that passed on knowledge, that remembered the deeds of ancestors. A hunting song might also recount the tale of the greatest hunter of the previous generation, the one who slew the bear that had terrorized the village, weaving instruction and legend together. The second category of human songs was laments. Men discovered death quickly. Unlike elves, who could only be killed by violence or fade slowly over millennia, men died of sickness, of age, of accident. A child might fall into a river and drown. An elder might go to sleep and not wake. A woman might die in childbirth. Death was everywhere, woven into the fabric of human existence, and so men sang of it constantly. Their laments were raw. They did not have the elves' sophisticated understanding of mortality, the philosophical acceptance that came from being immortal and watching the mortal world turn. Human laments were cries of pain, of loss, of rage against the unfairness of it all. They were songs that demanded answers from a universe that gave none. Why did the child drown? Why did the mother die? Why did the strong hunter fall ill and waste away? The songs asked these questions over and over, and the only answer was the echo of their own voices. Yet in that echo, there was something profound. The act of singing the lament, of giving voice to grief, created a kind of healing. It did not erase the pain, but it shared it, distributed it among all who heard. A village mourning together, singing the same lament, became stronger in their shared sorrow. The song bound them, reminded them that they were not alone in facing death. When men first encountered elves, they were awed and terrified in equal measure. The elves were tall, bright, seemingly untouched by time. Their music was unlike anything men had ever heard, intricate and haunting, filled with references to things men did not understand. Some men fled from the elves, believing them to be spirits or demons. Others approached cautiously, offering gifts, seeking knowledge. The elves, for their part, were curious about men. Here was a new creation, a second children of Iluvatar, different in every way. The elves called them Atani, the second-born, or Hildor, the followers. Some elves pitied men for their mortality. Others admired them for their fierce vitality. A few, a very few, came to love them. In Beleriand, during the wars against Morgoth, men and elves fought side by side. The great elf lord Finrod Felagund took men under his protection, teaching them language and lore. The Edain, the three houses of men who allied with the elves, learned Elvish songs, and began to incorporate elements of them into their own music. The result was a hybrid tradition, uniquely powerful. The Edain's battle songs combined elven melody with human rhythm. They had the beauty of Elvish composition, but the driving intensity of human urgency. When the warriors of the House of Hador marched to war, they sang in Sindarin, the gray elven tongue, but with a cadence that was entirely their own. The song propelled them forward, gave them courage, drowned out fear. It spoke of glory, of defending their land, of standing beside the elves against the darkness. And when they fell, as so many did, the elves sang laments for them, honoring their sacrifice. But human songs changed rapidly. Unlike elven music, which remained stable over centuries, human music evolved with each generation. A song passed from father to son might be altered, new verses added, old ones forgotten or changed. Within 100 years, a song could become almost unrecognizable. This mutability frustrated elven historians who valued precision and preservation. But it also gave human music a dynamism, an ability to adapt and respond to new circumstances. After the fall of Beleriand and the sinking of that land beneath the waves, the surviving Edain were granted the island of Numenor as a reward for their faithfulness. There, they built a new civilization, one that blended human ambition with elven wisdom, and their music flourished. Numenorian music was grand, formal, structured. They built great choirs, trained singers from childhood, composed elaborate works for state occasions and religious rituals. They sang hymns to Eru Ilúvatar, the One, acknowledging the source of all creation. They sang of the sea, for they were a seafaring people, and the ocean was both their highway and their mystery. They sang of their kings, the line of Elros, who had chosen mortality but were given extended lifespans, ruling for centuries and becoming legends in their own time. But even in Numenor's golden age, there was a shadow. The Numenorians were mortal, and they knew it. No matter how long they lived, no matter how great their achievements, death came for them in the end. This knowledge bred a resentment, a jealousy of the elves who would never die. Some Numenorians began to sing songs that questioned the gift of men, as Ilúvatar had named mortality. Why was death a gift? What kind of creator gives his children oblivion? These dark songs grew louder as the centuries passed, especially after Sauron, the lieutenant of Morgoth, was brought to Numenor as a captive and began to poison the hearts of the kings. He taught them to fear death, to rebel against it, to seek immortality by any means. The songs of Numenor turned from praise to defiance, from hymns to curses. And when the island finally sank, destroyed by the wrath of the Valar for its blasphemy, the songs went with it. The great choirs drowned. The libraries of written music were swallowed by the waves. Only a handful of faithful escaped, sailing east to Middle-earth, carrying with them fragments of Numenor's musical heritage. Those fragments were preserved in Gondor and Arnor, the kingdoms founded by the survivors. They became treasured relics, sung at important occasions, taught to each new generation with reverence. But they were ghosts of what had been, echoes of a glory now lost. The Numenorians in exile sang them with a profound sadness, knowing that they represented not only their ancestors' achievements, but also their tragic downfall. The most famous of these surviving songs is Alcar I Atnatarian, the glory of the fathers of men. It is a long, formal piece written in Quenya, the High Elven tongue that Numenor had adopted for ceremonial use. It recounts the deeds of the great heroes of men, Bear, Hador, Hurin, Chuer, Eärendil. It speaks of their courage, their loyalty, their willingness to face death for the sake of others. And it ends not with triumph, but with a question. What becomes of men after death? Where do they go? Even the elves do not know, for the fate of men was hidden by Iluvatar, a mystery beyond the world. That question hangs at the end of the song, unresolved, haunting. It is a reminder that for all their achievements, men remain fundamentally uncertain about their place in the cosmos. They are brave, passionate, creative, but they are also lost, seeking meaning in a life that ends too soon. In the Third Age, as Gondor slowly declined and Arnor fell into ruin, human music became simpler again. The grand choirs faded. The complex compositions were forgotten. What remained were folk songs, ballads, marching chants. These were the songs of soldiers guarding the borders of a shrinking realm, of farmers tilling fields in the shadow of distant mountains, of rangers wandering the wilderness, protecting people who did not even know they existed. These songs were humble, but they carried a deep truth. They spoke of duty, of endurance, of continuing to fight even when hope seemed lost. They were the songs of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and in their own way, they were as heroic as any epic lay. One such song, sung by the Rangers of the North, has only 2 verses. It speaks of watching through the long night, of standing guard while others sleep, of serving without thanks or recognition. It ends with a simple affirmation: "We are here, we remain." It is not beautiful in the way that elven songs are beautiful. It does not soar or shimmer, but it endures, passed from ranger to ranger, generation after generation, a quiet testament to the stubborn courage of men. And somewhere in the wild, a lone voice sings it into the darkness, waiting for the dawn. The island of Númenor rose from the sea as a star, bright, perfect, impossible. The Valar themselves shaped it, raising mountains from the ocean floor, filling valleys with forests and meadows, setting a great harbor in the west where ships could rest after the long voyage from Middle-earth. At the island's heart stood Meneltarma, the pillar of heaven, a mountain so tall its peak pierced the clouds. Upon that peak, open to the sky, was a sacred place where no structure could be built, where the Númenorians would come to worship Iluvatar in silence, offering prayers without words. Silence on Meneltarma, but everywhere else Númenor sang. In the Golden Age, when the kings were wise and the people grateful for their gifts, the music of Númenor was the finest in all Arda. The elves acknowledged it, even they who were masters of song. There was something in the Númenorian voice, a richness, a depth, that came from mortality embraced rather than feared. They knew their time was limited, and so they sang with a fervor that even the immortal could not quite match. The city of Armenilos, the Golden, rang with music from dawn to dusk. Every morning, as the sun rose over the eastern sea, choirs assembled in the courtyards of the king's house and sang the Aryan Lalia, the hymn to the sun. It was a tradition begun by Elros, the first king, half-elven by birth but who chose the fate of men. The hymn thanked Eru for the gift of light, for the new day, for life itself. Hundreds of voices joined in harmony, and the sound echoed through the streets, waking the city in beauty. At noon, when the sun stood at its height, the sailors in the harbor sang the Éireann Lura, the song of the sea. This was a custom brought from the Edain of old, from the days when men first learned to build ships and venture onto the waves. The song honored Ulmo, the Vala of waters, and asked for safe passage, fair winds, and protection from storms. It was sung in unison, simple and strong, a practical prayer from a practical people. And at sunset, when the light turned gold and the shadows grew long, the women of Númenor would gather on their rooftops and sing the Nuru Nayene, the lament of light. This was the most beautiful of all Númenorian songs, haunting and bittersweet. It mourned the passing of the day, the fading of light into darkness, but it also celebrated the promise of return, the certainty that the sun would rise again. The melody was complex, full of overlapping lines, each voice weaving around the others like threads in a tapestry. Visitors from Middle-earth, hearing it for the first time, were moved to tears, though they could not say why. Númenor was a land of festivals, and each festival had its songs. The Arukirme, the prayer to Eru, was celebrated in the spring, when new growth appeared and the world renewed itself. The people climbed Meneltarma in pilgrimage, singing as they ascended, and at the summit they stood in silence, offering wordless thanksgiving. But on the way down, they sang again, joyful songs of life and hope. The Erule Tale, the praise of Eru, came in the autumn, at harvest time. This was a communal celebration, with feasting and dancing and music that lasted for days. The songs were cheerful, rhythmic, designed to accompany the stamping of feet and the clapping of hands. They spoke of abundance, of the earth's generosity, of the rewards of labor. Children learned these songs from infancy, and even the very old, bent with years, would sing them with gusto, remembering the harvests of their youth. And there were the songs of the Sea Kings, the great mariners who explored the waters of Arda and returned with tales of distant lands. These songs were epic, narrative, filled with adventure and danger. They spoke of storms that rose without warning, of sea monsters glimpsed in the deep, of islands where strange peoples dwelt, of the edge of the world where the seas poured off into the void. The most famous of these was the Aldarian Ar Erendies, the song of Aldarian and Erendies, which told the tragic tale of a king who loved the sea more than his wife, and the sorrow that resulted. It was performed as a duet, male and female voices alternating, each expressing their perspective, neither wholly right nor wholly wrong. The song had no happy ending, only the recognition of love lost to obsession. But beneath all this beauty, a shadow grew. The Númenorians lived longer than other men, some for 300 years, even 4, but they still died. And the knowledge of death gnawed at them, especially as they looked toward the west, toward Valinor, the undying lands where the Elves dwelt in perpetual joy. The Elves did not die. The Valar did not die. Why should men? A new song began to spread, quietly at first, whispered in private, but growing louder with each generation. It was called the Meliste, the song of love-envy, though it might better have been called the song of resentment. It questioned why men were barred from Valinor, why they could not sail west and join the immortals. It suggested that the Valar were cruel, that Eru had been unfair, that mortality was not a gift but a curse. The kings tried to suppress this song, to forbid its singing. But a song once born is hard to kill. It spread anyway, changing slightly with each singer, adapting, surviving. And as Númenor grew in power and pride, the Meliste became more than whispered dissent. It became a rallying cry. Then Sauron came. Captured in war and brought to Númenor as a prisoner, he turned captivity into victory through cunning and lies. He flattered the king, Ar-Pharazôn, feeding his pride. He taught that death could be defeated, that the Valar had lied, that immortality could be seized by force. And slowly, insidiously, the music of Númenor changed. The hymns to Eru ceased. The temples on Meneltarma were abandoned. In their place rose new songs, dark and martial, praising power, conquest, dominion. The Númenóreans, who had once been friends to the Elves, now hunted them for sport. They sailed to Middle-earth not as teachers and allies but as conquerors, taking tribute, burning forests, enslaving peoples. And finally, in his ultimate madness, Ar-Pharazôn gathered a fleet so vast it seemed to cover the sea. He sailed west, toward Valinor itself, intending to make war on the Valar and seize immortality by force. His fleet sang as it sailed, a song of defiance, of rebellion, of doom. "We are the kings of the earth. We bow to none. We will live forever, though the world itself burn." The Valar, grieving, laid down their guardianship and called upon Eru. And Eru answered. The world broke. The seas rose. Númenor sank beneath the waves in a single night, drowning in fire and water. The great fleet was swallowed. The cities collapsed. The choirs fell silent, their voices cut off mid-song. Only 9 ships escaped, led by Elendil the Faithful, who had rejected Sauron's lies and remained true to the old ways. They fled east, back to Middle-earth, carrying with them the remnants of Númenorian culture, seeds and tools, books and heirlooms, and fragments of songs. Those survivors founded Gondor and Arnor, and they built great cities. Minas Anor, Minas Ithil, Osgiliath, Anuminas. They tried to recreate the glory of Númenor, to keep alive its music and traditions. But it was never the same. The songs they sang in exile were tinged with profound loss, with the knowledge that their true home was gone forever, lost beneath the waves. One song, however, refused to die entirely. The Númeiramar, the Lament of Númenor, was composed by a survivor in the years immediately after the downfall. It is not known who wrote it. The author left no name, perhaps intentionally, feeling unworthy to claim credit for such a work. The song is long, spanning dozens of verses, each one describing a different aspect of Númenor's beauty and then its destruction. It speaks of the white towers of Armenilos falling, of libraries burning, of gardens withering beneath ash and flame. It speaks of families torn apart, of children screaming for parents who would never come, of the sea swallowing the land with a hunger that could not be sated. It speaks of the silence that followed, the terrible silence of a world in which Númenor no longer existed. But the Númeiramar does not end in despair. Its final verse speaks of memory, of the duty of those who survive to remember, to preserve, to tell the tale. It says that Númenor fell because it forgot gratitude, forgot humility, forgot that mortality was not a curse but a gift that freed men from the weariness of eternity. And it vows that the survivors will not make the same mistake, that they will build new kingdoms founded on wisdom rather than pride. This final verse is always sung alone, by a single voice, unaccompanied. It is a tradition that the others fall silent, that the soloists stand forth and carry the weight of the song's conclusion. It is an immense responsibility, and those chosen to sing it prepare for years, ensuring that every word, every note is perfect. In Gondor, the Númeiramar is performed once each year on the anniversary of the downfall. The city falls silent. Work ceases. People gather in the courtyards and streets, listening. And when the final verse is sung, when the soloist's voice rises in both sorrow and hope, many weep openly, mourning not only Númenor but all the beauty that the world has lost. Yet even as they weep, they know that the song itself is a kind of victory. Númenor is gone, yes, but it is not forgotten. It lives in the melody, in the words, in the hearts of those who sing and those who listen. The towers have fallen, but the memory of towers remains. The island has sunk, but the idea of the island, the dream of it, persists. And sometimes, sailors claim, On certain nights when the moon is full and the sea is calm, you can hear music rising from beneath the waves. A phantom choir, singing in drowned halls, their voices distorted by water but still recognizable. They sing the old songs, the hymns of Armenilos, the lullabies of Anjunia, the marching chants of the king's fleet. It is probably just the wind, the rush of tide over submerged ruins, the mind playing tricks in the lonely dark. Probably. But there is a haunting quality to the sound, a note that does not quite belong to wind or wave, a note that echoes, refusing to die. And those who hear it feel a strange longing, a yearning for a place they have never seen, for a beauty that was lost before they were born. The song of Numenor, calling from the deep, waiting to be remembered. War has its own music. Not the music of beauty or sorrow, but the music of necessity, of survival, of steel meeting steel and the cries of the dying. It is a harsh music, brutal and unforgiving, yet it has shaped the peoples of Middle-earth as surely as any hymn or lullaby. In the wars of Beleriand, when elves and men stood together against Morgoth, the songs of battle were forged. These were not songs to be sung in comfortable halls, over wine and gentle harps. These were songs to be roared into the teeth of the wind, to be shouted over the clash of swords, to be chanted by warriors who knew they might not see another dawn. The Noldor had their war songs, fierce and intricate. They sang as they marched to battle, great companies moving in perfect unison, their voices blending into a single mighty voice that echoed off mountains. The songs spoke of vengeance, of reclaiming what was stolen, of never yielding. They invoked the names of fallen heroes, calling on their spirits to lend strength. They were songs of pride, of defiance, of a people who would rather die fighting than submit to darkness. The men of the three houses had simpler songs, but no less powerful. The House of Bear sang low, rumbling chants that sounded like thunder rolling across plains. The House of Hador sang sharp, staccato rhythms that matched the beat of hooves and the clash of shields. The House of Haleth sang in minor keys, eerie and unsettling, songs that spoke of endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. These songs served multiple purposes. They coordinated movement, allowing large groups to march or charge in unison. They drowned out fear, filling the mind with rhythm and purpose so there was no room for doubt. They intimidated enemies, projecting strength and unity. And they honored the dead, naming them, remembering them, ensuring that even in death they were not forgotten. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears, the greatest and most terrible battle of the First Age, was thick with song. The elven host sang as they advanced, their voices rising in a hymn that spoke of light conquering darkness. But the forces of Morgoth answered with their own music, the drums of Angband, deep and terrible, beating a rhythm that shook the earth. Orc voices raised in harsh, guttural chants, words of hate and mockery. And above it all, the roar of dragons, a sound that was not quite song but carried the weight of ancient malice. The battle lasted days. The singing faltered as exhaustion set in, as warriors fell, as hope dwindled. By the end, the elven hymns had become ragged, broken, more wail than song. The survivors staggered from the field, and for a long time afterward, none could bear to sing the songs of that battle. They were too painful, too full of loss. But the songs were eventually sung again, because to forget them would be to forget those who fell. The Nirnaeth Arnodiad, the lament for unnumbered tears, became one of the great tragic epics of elven lore. It named the heroes: Fingon, who fell beneath the axes of Gothmog; Hurin, who fought alone at the end, slaying 70 trolls before being captured; Hewr, who died so that others might escape. The song did not flinch from the horror, did not soften the truth. It told of defeat, of betrayal by allies, of the darkness closing in. But it also told of courage, of sacrifice, of holding the line even when all was lost. In the Third Age, as war continued across Middle-earth in different forms, new battle songs emerged. The Rohirrim, the horse lords of the plains, sang as they rode to war. Their songs were rhythmic, matching the pounding of hooves, building in intensity as the charge approached. They sang of glory, of earning a place in the halls of their ancestors, of dying with honor. The most famous of their songs, the one sung at Pelennor Fields, spoke simply and powerfully. "Arise, arise, riders of Theoden." It was less a song than a war cry set to rhythm, but it carried the weight of a culture that valued bravery above all. Gondor's battle songs were more formal, structured, echoing the discipline of their armies. They sang in cadence as they marched, songs that spoke of duty, of defending the realm, of standing as a bulwark against the night. There was less emphasis on personal glory and more on collective responsibility. A soldier of Gondor sang not of his own deeds, but of the city he protected, the people he served, the line he would not let break. The Rangers of the North sang hardly at all. Their battles were fought in silence, in ambush and stealth. But they had songs for the aftermath, quiet songs sung around small fires, songs that mourned comrades lost and renewed vows to continue the fight. These songs were rarely heard by outsiders, for the Rangers were few and scattered, but they were deeply important to those who sang them. Even the enemy had songs, though to call them that is perhaps generous. The orcs chanted as they marched, harsh and discordant, songs filled with cruelty and mockery. They sang of destruction, of pain inflicted, of the pleasures of torment. These songs were weapons in themselves, designed to break the spirits of those who heard them. When an orc horde approached, their chanting reached ahead of them, a wall of sound that sowed fear. And in Mordor, in the Black Tower, there were darker songs still. Sauron's sorcerers chanted in black speech, weaving spells and curses, their voices layered and distorted, creating harmonies that should not exist, that hurt the mind to hear. These were not songs of artistry or emotion, but of pure malice, of will imposed upon reality. Yet even in the darkest times, the songs of the free peoples endured. They were sung in besieged cities, in hidden camps, in the ruins of once great fortresses. They were sung by soldiers who knew they were likely to die, by civilians who waited in terror for news, by children who learned the words without fully understanding what they meant. One of the most poignant battle songs of the Third Age is the Orodruin Nor, the Fire of Mount Doom, composed after the War of the Ring. It is not a song of battle itself, but a song about the aftermath, about walking through the ruins of war and finding hope in the ashes. It speaks of Frodo and Sam, the two hobbits who carried the ring into the heart of the enemy's land and destroyed it, saving Middle-earth at the cost of their own innocence. The song does not glorify war. It acknowledges the cost, the pain, the scars that never fully heal. But it also celebrates the courage of the small, the unlikely, the overlooked. The Orodruin Nor is sung not by warriors but by common folk, by farmers and craftsmen and merchants. It is a song of gratitude, of recognition that freedom was purchased with blood and sorrow. And it ends with a vow, to remember, to honor, and to ensure that such a war is never needed again. But even as it is sung, the drums begin again. Faintly in the distance, almost too quiet to hear. A rhythm that never quite stops, never quite fades. the drumbeat of Mordor echoing through time, waiting for the next war, waiting to be answered. Not all songs survive. This is the hardest truth of all, the one that weighs most heavily on those who care for memory and lore. For every melody that rings out in the Hall of Fire, there are 10 that have faded into silence. For every epic preserved in scrolls and taught to new generations, there are 100 fragmentary verses scrawled in margins, referenced in catalogs but no longer known. Some songs are lost to violence. Libraries burn. Cities fall. Entire peoples are eradicated, and their music dies with them. The songs of the petty dwarves, the stunted kin who lived in Beleriand before the coming of the Noldor, are gone completely. Not a single verse remains, only vague references in old texts that mention them singing in their caves. What did they sing of? What was the sound of their voices? No one knows. No one will ever know. Some songs are lost to time. Languages change and meanings are forgotten. A song might survive in written form, every word preserved, but if no one can translate it, if the cultural context is lost, it becomes meaningless. There are scrolls in Minas Tirith written in archaic forms of Adunaic, the language of Númenor, that scholars can read only partially. The songs recorded there remain tantalizingly close, yet impossibly distant. Some songs are lost to deliberate erasure. When Númenor fell into shadow and began worshipping Melkor, the old hymns to Eru were not merely abandoned, they were destroyed. Parchments were burned, singers silenced, sometimes permanently. When the island sank, much was lost, but some had been lost even before, victims of ideology and fear. And some songs are lost simply because no one thought to preserve them. The lullaby a mother sang to her child in a forgotten village. The working song a smith hummed while shaping iron. The walking tune a traveler whistled on a lonely road. These were never written down, never formalized, never thought important enough to save. They lived in the moment and died with the singer, leaving no trace. What remains, then, is precious beyond measure. The songs sung in Rivendell, in Lothlorien, in the Shire, in the halls of Minas Tirith, these are survivors. They have endured through ages of war and darkness, passed from voice to voice, each generation safeguarding them for the next. In Rivendell, the tradition of preservation is most strong. Elrond's house is a repository of memory, and songs are among its greatest treasures. But even there, the lore masters speak with sadness of what has been lost, of gaps in the record that can never be filled. Lothlorien, under Lady Galadriel, maintains a different tradition. There, songs are not written but remembered, held in the perfect memory of the elves who dwell there. The forest itself seems to remember, the trees whispering melodies in the wind. It is a living archive, but it is also fragile. When the elves finally depart Middle-earth, sailing west into the uttermost west, the songs of Lothlorien will go with them, and the forest will fall silent. In the Shire, the hobbits sing songs that are ancient without knowing it. They're walking songs, they're drinking songs, they're silly rhymes and nonsense verses. Some of these contain echoes of much older melodies, transformed over centuries into something new yet carrying traces of their origins. A hobbit singing about beer and cheese might be unknowingly preserving a fragment of a Númenorian marching chant, the rhythm and basic melody structure unchanged even as the words became frivolous. And in Gondor, the traditions are formal, careful, almost desperate. The stewards and lore masters know that they are the last guardians of Númenor's legacy. They teach the old songs to every generation, drilling the words and melodies until they are burned into memory. They commission copies of ancient manuscripts, ensuring that even if one is lost, others remain. They hold festivals where the songs must be performed exactly as written, with no improvisation allowed, for fear that change will lead to loss. Yet even with all this effort, the songs continue to fade. Fewer people learn them, fewer care. The world is moving forward, and the past, no matter how glorious, is still the past. There is a song that haunts the dreams of lore masters, a song that supposedly existed but is now lost beyond recovery. It is called the Ainu Lindale Lomlindi, the song of the music of the Ainer. According to legend, an elven bard of the First Age, whose name is variously given as Daron or Magler or someone else entirely, attempted to create a musical representation of the great music that shaped the world. Not a description of it, but an echo of it, a piece that would capture in mortal sound something of the divine harmony. If such a song ever existed, it is lost now. There are references to it in scattered texts, tantalizing mentions that a great work was composed but no details of its content. Some scholars believe it never existed at all, that it is a myth, a legend about a legend. Others believe it did exist but was too powerful, too dangerous, and was deliberately destroyed or hidden. What would such a song sound like? What would happen if it were sung? Would it reshape reality as the original music did? Would it drive the listener mad with the weight of cosmic truth? Or would it simply be beautiful, heartbreakingly, impossibly beautiful, a glimpse of the song that existed before existence? No one knows, and perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps some songs are meant to remain mysteries, their absence as important as their presence. In the Shire, on a quiet evening, an old hobbit hums a tune he learned from his grandfather. The tune is strange, not quite like other hobbit songs. It has an odd cadence, a minor key unusual for the generally cheerful folk of the Shire. He does not know where it came from. His grandfather did not know. It is simply a tune, old and peculiar, and he hums it because it comforts him. If a lore master of Gondor heard it, they might recognize fragments. A phrase that echoes a Númenórean lullaby. A progression that matches a section of an ancient hymn. But the hobbit will never meet that lore master, and the recognition will never happen. The tune continues, unrecognized, carrying within it the ghost of something once grand. And in the deep forests where no one walks, the trees sigh in harmonies that were once songs, their leaves rustling in rhythms that match melodies long forgotten. The world is full of lost music, waiting to be heard again, or waiting to finally fully die. All songs return to the one. This is the teaching of the wise, the comfort offered in the face of loss and fading. Every melody ever sung, every note ever sounded, is ultimately part of the great music that Eru Ilúvatar wove at the beginning of time. Nothing is truly lost. It simply returns to the source, rejoining the cosmic harmony from which it came. But such philosophy offers cold comfort to those who love a particular song, a specific melody that holds meaning and memory. To say that a song returns to the one does not ease the pain of hearing it sung for the last time, of watching the last person who knows it die, of realizing that silence has finally claimed victory. Yet in another sense, the teaching holds deep truth. Songs do not exist in isolation. Each is connected to every other, part of a vast tapestry of sound and meaning that stretches across time. The lullaby an elven mother sang in Beleriand shares something with the walking song a hobbit hums in the Shire, though millennia and miles separate them. The rhythm, the use of repetition, the purpose of bringing comfort, these are universal, threads that run through all music. And perhaps in some realm beyond mortal understanding, all the lost songs still exist. Perhaps they echo in the halls of Mandos, where the dead wait for the world's ending. Perhaps they resonate in Valinor, heard by the Valar who remember everything. Perhaps they drift on the winds of the void, fragments of melody waiting to be woven into some new creation. Tolkien himself seemed to believe this. In his letters and writings, he returned again and again to the idea of subcreation, the notion that mortal artists, in making their works, participate in the ongoing creation of the world. A song is not merely sound. It is an act of creation, adding something new to reality. And if creation is eternal, if it continues beyond the circles of the world, then perhaps every song, no matter how humble, has a permanence that transcends its apparent loss. The hobbits know this in their own simple way. They sing without worry, without the burden of history that weighs on elves and men. They sing because singing is good, because it makes the road easier and the beer taste better and the fireside warmer. They do not preserve their songs in scrolls or teach them with formal rigor. They simply sing, passing them on naturally, changing them as needed, unconcerned with authenticity. And yet, Hobbit songs survive. They adapt, they evolve, but they endure. There is a lesson in that, a wisdom that the learned sometimes miss. That preservation is not always about rigid structure and careful cataloging. Sometimes, survival comes from flexibility, from allowing songs to change and grow and become new things while retaining their essential spirit. In the end, perhaps that is what matters most. Not that every note be preserved exactly as first sung, but that the spirit of song itself continues. That voices are raised in melody, in harmony, in defiance of the silence. That people continue to create, to share, to pass on their music to the next generation. The world is old. It has seen ages come and go, kingdoms rise and fall, peoples born and vanished. Through it all, song has endured. In the darkest times, in the deepest despair, someone has always sung. A prisoner in a dungeon, a soldier on a battlefield, a refugee fleeing a burning city, they sang. Because song is the final thing that cannot be taken, the last assertion of self in the face of annihilation. And when the world finally ends, when the last battle is fought and the circles of ardor are broken, and the children of Ilúvatar pass beyond the walls of the world into whatever lies beyond, perhaps there will still be song. Perhaps in that new place, that unknowable realm, the elves and men will sing together one final time, joining their voices in a melody that encompasses all that was, all that is, all that could ever be. The song that never ends. The song that includes all other songs. The song of the one. Until then, we listen. We remember. We sing what we can, preserve what we can, honor what has been lost. We acknowledge that much has faded, but we celebrate what remains. We light candles against the dark, knowing they will eventually burn out, but lighting them anyway because the light, however brief, matters. In Rivendell, in the Hall of Fire, an elf stands and begins to sing. The song is old, older than kingdoms, older than many of those who listen. It speaks of starlight and awakening, of sorrow and joy intertwined, of a beauty that endures even when everything else fades. The others listen, silent, reverent. They have heard this song before, perhaps 100 times, perhaps 1,000. But each time feels like the first time, for it is sung with love, with care, with the knowledge that someday, perhaps soon, it will be sung for the last time. But not tonight. Tonight, the song rings out clear and true, filling the hall, spilling out into the valley beyond, rising toward the stars. And somewhere in the deep places of the world, in caverns forgotten and forests untouched, in the hearts of those who have never heard this particular melody but who carry music within them nonetheless, something answers. A note pure and clear and impossibly ancient. The echo of creation, the breath of the one, singing, always singing, forever.